Hello and welcome to episode 11 of the Devy to Dynasty Film Room podcast. I'm your host, Matt Jackson. No Rupert with us tonight, but don't you guys worry. We've got Matt Cooper joining me tonight. Matt, how are you doing?
Doing great, man. Rupert's sick, so get well soon, man. We miss you, brother.
Yep. Praying for him to get well soon. But we're excited for our show tonight. Before I dive in, Cooper, I know Thanksgiving is right around the corner, and one of the things that I was playing this game with my youth group on Sunday, and I wanted to try it with you. Okay, it's gonna be real quick, don't worry. But favorite Thanksgiving side dish. If you're thinking I can't leave Thanksgiving without having this side dish, what's your go-to Thanksgiving side dish?
Easy buckets. It's sweet potato casserole. No
Sweet
question.
potato casserole. I'm either a sweet potato casserole or I like the stuffing. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a huge stuffing fan.
Stuffing is really good,
My
but
wife is definitely somebody that she can't leave Thanksgiving without a green bean casserole. It's not Thanksgiving unless she gets her green bean casserole. So
okay.
not many
To each,
people have
to
heard,
each
heard
their
her
own,
do
man.
that, but
To each their own.
yeah, to each their own. I think you nailed it with the sweet potato casserole. That's the 101 of Thanksgiving side dishes, in my opinion. But we're not talking Thanksgiving. We're all talking about what happens on Thanksgiving, and that is football. We had an action packed weekend of college and NFL football last weekend, and man, I figured there's no better way to start than diving right in. Man, I watched that Michigan versus Penn State game, and man, what an interesting game we had with Michigan versus Penn State. Michigan didn't throw a single pass in the entire second half. Blake Corum, again shows that he's the real deal. He had 145 yards, 2 touchdowns. The question I wanted to ask you, Cooper, is Blake Corum your RB2? Is he closer to your RB1? Where do you have him rated in your dynasty rankings right now?
Well, he's definitely not close to my RB1. I mean, all due respect, he has earned his way into the conversation of, um, you know, he's a legit Devy asset. Okay, for years we've not really given him the credit that he deserves. Everybody's wanted to pump up his teammate Donovan Edwards, who he's clearly outperforming, because he's small, and I think that's probably my biggest concern. Is not just the size, because he's got good BMI. So while he's only 5'8", I believe, he is over 210 pounds. And so he's stocky, he's strong. He's not like, this isn't like a James Cook like guy. Like, he can handle work between the tackles.
Yeah.
My biggest concern is that when a guy is a little on the smaller side, you want to see him be a pass catcher. And he's not been super involved as a pass catcher throughout his time at Michigan. So that's probably my biggest question mark on him. There's a lot to like. He's not my Devy RB2, or my 2024 RB2. He's probably closer to 4 or 5, but I think he belongs in the conversation. And obviously, when all is said and done, and we've got combine, and we've got draft capital, and we've got a much deeper study of the all-22, like, could he be my RB2 in the class when all is said and done? I think maybe. But as of right now, I think that for me, far and away, the RB1 is Travion Henderson.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then after that, I think it is wide open right now. Like, nobody has established themselves. In my mind, I'm not a huge Braylon Allen guy. I think most people would probably have Braylon Allen RB2. Obviously, Rocket Sanders, we've talked about on this show that he's not been playing well this season. I don't even know if he'll come out for the draft at this point. But I'm a huge fan of guys like Devin Neal, Bucky Irving. I'm a massive fan of Bucky Irving. So it's a little bit of a weak class. We'll talk about Jonathan Brooks in a minute. He would have been a good addition to this class. Now I'm not even sure if he'll come out.
Yeah.
So Blake Corum's going to put himself in the conversation. Right now, I think I'd probably lean Devin Neal. That's my RB2, though.
One thing that I wonder about, Blake Corum is he hasn't been utilized as a pass catcher, right? That was something that you hit on. Is that because Donovan Edwards was always the pass catcher on that team, that he was always getting the third down work, or can he not catch the ball? I mean, that's not something that I've seen him.
That's a fair question. And I mean, I think it's one of those things when you're evaluating a pass catching skill set for a running back, there's a pass fail grade of like, can he catch passes, period. Yeah. And most guys pass that. Not everybody, but most guys pass that. then there's a whole bunch of other factors that come into the equation. Once he catches the pass, how quick is he at transitioning from a catcher to a runner with the yards after catch? That's huge when you're catching a lot of these short dump off type of things. And so some guys are more fluid at that than others are. How is your pass protection? Does that keep you off the field on third downs? And then, like, I think the elite of the elite pass catchers can go out and like run wide receiver routes and win out of the slot and beat linebackers and wheel routes and catch passes a little deeper down the field and not just right at the line of scrimmage. So where is Blake Corum on that spectrum? If you're talking about pass fail, can he catch the ball? It's probably a pass, but
there's a difference between catching a pass and getting a 2-yard gain and taking it 20 yards. I mean, those are two different skill sets.
Yeah. And but you're right. It's a fair point that Donovan Edwards is really good at all that stuff, and so maybe he just hasn't been asked to. And yeah, I mean, we'll see at the end of the year. Obviously, we're going to dig into the all-22 on all these 2024 guys and watch every snap in a lot of games, and that'll give us a much clearer picture of, okay, do the stats tell the whole story? And even like combine drills, I don't want to read too much into those combine drills, but like when you watch Kenneth Walker, okay, that guy had like 13 receptions his entire college career, but he went out to the combine and he looked really smooth, catching passes in those drills. He wasn't fighting the hands. It was really natural for him to catch a pass, transition upfield as a runner.
Yeah, and that was something I was going to mention, right? We don't put a lot of stock in the combine, but there are certain aspects of the combine that like you want to see him do well in. Like I want to see, if you're a pass catcher, I want to see you do well in the gauntlet drill. For as much as we don't put stock into the combine, I mean, there are certain drills that like you want to see them look clean catching passes, and I think that can do a lot to help his stock.
Yeah, I think it's especially important for a guy like this that you have that question of, can he do it and he just wasn't asked to, or can he not do it? And I mean, you're in an environment where even if it is practice and there's no pads or whatever, you're seeing him get thrown a lot of passes his way. And how are his hands and how natural does he look doing it? I think it's worth paying attention to for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So not RB2, but he can gain the conversation with a good.
I mean, it's an impressive season he's putting together.
Yeah.
No disrespect at all to Blake Corum. I just think, like, at this point, Devin Neal feels like a more complete football player to me.
Yeah.
And he's got more explosiveness to his game.
For sure. Well, as you guys did last week, we're going to jump back and forth between the college and NFL takes. So I've got an NFL question for you, man. And it has to deal around the Carolina Panthers and their number 1 draft pick, Bryce Young. I know you guys debated, Bryce Young versus CJ Stroud last week, so we're not going to go down that rabbit trail again. But when it comes to Bryce Young, I mean, with what he's shown this season, with his size, I mean, his size obviously a question mark. The offensive line is not doing him any favors. Are we worried about Bryce Young?
Yes and no. I think, am I worried that he's going to be a longtime starting quarterback in the NFL? No. I think still his mental processing ability, even though he's thrown some picks, I think he reads the field really well. I think he's a good decision maker. He's accurate for the most part. He struggles throwing deep down the field with accuracy, but at least in the short to intermediate game, he's really accurate. So is he going to be a good starting quarterback in the NFL? I think so, when he gets a better infrastructure around him. Is he going to be a difference maker for fantasy? And I think that's always been the question with Bryce Young. I don't know, because I mean, you see right now, like when he doesn't have the infrastructure around him, he's not a guy that can put his team on his back, and the rushing ability clearly is not translating. Like he was fast for a college player, but he can't outrun NFL defensive linemen, and so when he gets under pressure, it's like all he can do just to not take a sack. Yeah. This is not a guy that's going to get out and bust off big runs and produce for you in that way in a fantasy sense. And he's not, like, deep ball is not his strength either. So if he's not pushing it deep down the field as a passer and he's not contributing as a runner, I think what we're seeing is a guy that is probably going to be a QB2 for most of his fantasy career, which is okay. It's not what you were hoping for when you took him at, if you were taking him at 103, 104, 105 in your rookie draft, you're hoping for more upside than that. I don't think he's got it.
You
What do you?
know, I got into a conversation with somebody actually today talking about Bryce Young. And when you go back to the 2017 season, you look at those two quarterbacks that came out in 2016, Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. After the 2017 season, which quarterback would you have rather had? Well, it was Carson Wentz after that potentially MVP season, right? Now you flash forward to this season, and Carson Wentz has bounced around a couple teams. He's in and out of rosters. Jared Goff looks like the far and away better pick. Now, what am I trying to say? Transition that to today. CJ Stroud looks like the far and away the better pick when it comes to Bryce Young. But I've always said, and I've told multiple people this, I try really hard not to write a quarterback off after one season. The transition to college, from college to NFL, is a tough transition. You're doing a lot of different changing. There's a lot of different things that you've got to learn. Um, I'm still giving the kid another year or two before I make a solid decision on Bryce Young. Now, will he ever be a top end QB1? I don't think so. But then again, I'm not going to write him off and say he's going to be a perennial or QB2 the rest of his life either. So,
Yeah, it's not like I'm not panicked about the statistical output this season with that supporting cast. Like that's kind of to be expected. It's more of like what I'm seeing with my eyes is that he doesn't have the same escapability and the same like just the physical traits. Like he doesn't have elite arm talent. We know he doesn't have good size. He's not got elite mobility. So I just the mental processing is what he does really well. So he needs like a ton of really good infrastructure. Like he needs good coaching. He needs good wide receivers that can get open so that they can stay on script. Like he needs to be a game manager.
yeah. Well,
If
I
he was
think
in
it
Brock
matters.
Purdy's situation, I think
Yeah.
he'd be really good.
Yeah. And I
But
think you're hitting on it, but because it makes a difference, right? He doesn't have Nick Saban coaching him. He doesn't have first round offensive linemen blocking for him. He doesn't have 2 or 3 first round wide receivers to throw the ball to, right? So I mean, I think that stuff matters.
mhm. And CJ Stroud doesn't have all that either. I mean, he's like it's a chicken or the egg conversation we talked about last week. Is CJ Stroud's supporting cast better than we thought they were, or is he elevating them because he's just that good? And I think it's probably a little bit of both. But CJ Stroud just has physical tools to overcome deficiencies around him in a way that Bryce Young does not have.
Yeah.
So I think you're not going to see Bryce Young put up big fantasy numbers unless he's got all of that infrastructure around him. And he's just in such a dumpster fire organization. And I hate to say that about my own team. It's like, is he ever going to have that infrastructure around him? I don't know. So I'm pretty worried. Like, how many years are you going to have to wait on it? You know,
Well,
is
I
it
mean,
going to be like
another
after his rookie contract, he goes to a new team and then finally you can feel good about Bryce Young? Like, that's a long time to wait, even for Dynasty where you're trying to take a long-term view. So I'm concerned about him from a Dynasty perspective.
for sure. I mean, another chicken and the egg thing is they traded DJ Moore to get the draft capital to draft Bryce Young. So if they still had DJ Moore, is that team a little better? So I mean, you can play
Mhm.
chicken and the egg all day with this situation. But yeah, I'm a little worried, but I'm not ready to jump ship quite yet. It's getting close, but it's not quite there yet. Going back to college football, man, I watched Arizona versus Colorado. Watched it for the sole purpose of watching Ted McMillan, and came away really impressed with him. He runs fantastic routes, high points the ball well. He's got a huge catch radius. The way he breaks down his hips and gets the defenders to bite inside coverage and then snaps off about a 3 or 4 yard breakaway, break in coverage. I mean, he runs really solid routes. I came away impressed with him. What are your thoughts on him as a Devy wide receiver?
Yeah, I really like him. And to be totally transparent, I've not watched a ton of Arizona football this year. I mean, like they are often on really, really late at night if you're on the East Coast. They've not been a ranked team all year. So I think I watched the game against USC, I think, when they played them a couple weeks ago. But it's not like a guy that I've watched a ton of. And so when I get access to more tape on him and especially more all 22, he's the guy that I'm going to be really intrigued to dig in on. But when you see the consistent production that he's putting up week after week after week as the top target earner on that team, putting up touchdowns, it seems like every single week, and you already know his frame is really intriguing.
Yeah.
I had a guy that's like 6'4", 6'5", over 200 pounds. You just have to be interested, right? When a guy's producing that much this early in his career with his physical profile, I think he's going to be a name that's really high on our boards when he's draft eligible in 2025. So we got plenty more time to watch him and study him. But he's a guy that I'm very interested in. And I love hearing from you. Obviously, you're a tape guy. So hearing that you've watched him and that you are seeing like technical skills as a route runner and not just the big physical, big bodied thing, like that's really encouraging for me to hear that you're noticing those things, because I obviously trust your evaluation a lot. So that's great to hear.
And what I really like, there's a lot of solid wide receivers coming out in the next 2 and 3 years, man. It's going to be a fun wide receiver class the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you one guy. While I was watching Tech McMillan, I turned it on, like I said, for the sole purpose of watching him. But one guy that I really came away impressed with was their running back, Jonah Coleman. He took over the job after Wiley went down, and he's run away with it. He's a former 3-star recruit, really underrated guy, but he had 179 yards on Saturday. He's got 744 on the season. He's averaging 7.2 yards per carry. When I watched him, man, he is a powerful runner. He's not going to run away with you. He's not going to beat you on the long speed, but he's got some pretty decent speed. Patient runner, really hits the hole hard whenever the hole opens up to him, and he's got some really good contact balance and lateral agility. Somebody that I wasn't expecting to come away as impressed as I did, but man, I think he could be somebody to keep an eye on over the next coming weeks.
Yeah, he popped a little bit to me, like I said, in that one Arizona game that I watched a couple weeks ago against USC. I don't know that I saw the speed that you're seeing, because I remember like the broadcasters in that game were commenting like Maurice Jones-Drew, like comping him to him. And I was like, I don't know, this guy looks kind of slow. But the contact balance, like you mentioned, it was like, man, this guy is just a freight train running through tackles. He runs hard.
Yeah.
He's kind of got that dog in him that you almost expect from a 3-star, that he's not out there trying to be a diva and get out of bounds. He wants to fight for every single yard. So I enjoyed watching him run. I don't know how serious he is as like an NFL prospect, but I did notice him for sure when I watched him.
225 pounds too. I mean, you want most big guys like that, or I mean, they're just grinders, right? They're getting 1 or 2 yards at a time and just taking contact hits, and they're getting the first down. He wasn't that type of runner when I watched him. He was more elusive and had more contact balance for a big guy. So it was at least impressive for me. Like I said, I don't know how big of a Devy asset he is, but I'm keeping my eye on him.
Yeah, worth noting for sure.
So going back to our NFL takes, man, what is happening to Trevor Lawrence? Is he just experiencing a slump this season? Is he a little overrated? I mean, I know we are ready to crown him as a top 5 quarterback after last season, after what he did for Jacksonville last year. And he's come out this year and he's not looked all that great. Are you buying the dip on Trevor Lawrence? Are you selling him to get what you can out of him? I mean, what are you doing with his stock right now?
I think that's a good question about what am I doing with him. And it's actually kind of hard for me to answer, because I don't know if I have a single share on any of my Dynasty rosters. And it's not because I'm like out on him or haven't liked him as a player. I just, it's just some players, even when you play in a lot of leagues, you just don't end up getting any shares of. And yeah, so if I had him on my rosters, I don't know what I would be looking to do with him right now. It's been a hugely disappointing season. I mean, you don't feel good about starting him at all in your lineup. So if you're contending, that's a problem. If you're rebuilding, I think he's probably a hold, and you're just hoping that, he turns things around, because you see what he did last year, and so he's at least capable of it. But I think turnovers have been a consistent issue for him since he came into the league. He's got more interceptions than he's got touchdowns this year. And I don't really get it, because he's got a good coaching staff, a good team around him. I mean, you got Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, and Evan Ingram. That's a pretty solid set of weapons. You got Travis Etienne like tearing it up out of the backfield. So he's got a lot around him that you can't really blame the situation.
No.
And from a fantasy perspective, he also doesn't run a ton. So that kind of hurts his upside. So you really need him to have a pretty strong touchdown to interception ratio to consistently be putting up 300 plus yards passing.
He's just
He's
not
just
doing
not
it.
doing any of that this
Yeah.
year. So yeah, I'm pretty worried about Trevor Lawrence. I think at this point, I'm curious where the market is on him. Like, what could you even sell him for at this point? I think you still probably could get a lot
Yeah.
because he's a big name and in super flex leagues. I mean, could you go and get a guy like Jared Goff, for example, that's a little bit older, not a sexy name, but he's a top 12 quarterback right now and probably will be for many years to come, and get a plus on top? Like, could you go send Trevor Lawrence for Jared Goff and get a plus on top? And then as a contender, now you actually have a guy that you feel good about putting in your lineup. I think if I was a contender, that's a move that I would be looking to try to make.
No, I think that's a great thing. I mean, I think you could easily get Jared Goff in a plus because, like you
Yeah,
said,
it's just
Trevor
what is the
Lawrence, I mean, he
plus?
still has that name, right? He's the young quarterback that everybody spent the farm to get a couple years ago. Like, I still think you can get Jared Goff plus for him. I don't think that's ridiculous.
No, not at all. And I think the question is, what is the plus? Because if you can get a significant skill player like a running back, wide receiver, tight end that's going to help your team, plus you get a quarterback that you feel better about putting in your lineup, that's a move that you've got to consider. And it's not like Jared Goff is ancient either. So that's a move that I would, especially if I'm on a contending team and I have Trevor Lawrence, I'm looking to make a move like that. And I think it's fair. Overrated is a strong word, but I don't know what else you call it when a guy is considered like this generational quarterback prospect and this is what he's doing on the football field. Like, I just I don't know how else you can say it except he's underperforming. He's been a disappointment. I don't think the Jaguars are probably very happy with what they're getting out of him right now, and I don't think any of his fantasy owners are either. So it's
Dude, I've,
concerning
I've
for
got
sure.
a fantasy football team right now that I'm going for the three-peat. I've won the championship the last 2 years and going for the three-peat. And I've got my quarterbacks are Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, and then I have Justin Jefferson as a wide receiver. So man, I am going through it right now.
Underperforming city, man. That's
I am going through it. So, but moving on, yeah, I agree with everything that you said. Moving on, you watched the Missouri game this last week, Missouri versus Tennessee, and man, talk about a blowout. I was expecting a much better game than what we got with that Missouri Tennessee game. Cody Schrader had 321 all-purpose yards. Is he a Devy asset that you're remotely interested in right now?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you put him on the sheet because he's someone I wanted us to talk about. It's going to be really interesting because he's draft eligible this season, and he's not really done anything before this season. But he transferred to Missouri from a D2 school, which is why you never heard of him before this year. And he has just quietly been setting things on fire in a good way every single week. It's not like, 321 all-purpose yards this week came out of nowhere. He's actually leading the SEC in rushing right now.
He's got over 1,000 yards for the season.
The SEC. Like, it's not like he's out there like leading the Mountain West in rushing yards, right? Like, he's leading the SEC in rushing yards.
And not only is he leading the SEC in rushing yards, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? He put up over 100 yards versus Georgia. I mean, a team that you want to see somebody that's a Devy asset perform against, and he did more than perform against them.
And then, like, the pass catching, we know how valuable that is for fantasy and what a trait that is that you're looking for. He put up over 100 receiving yards this week. So I think they said he was like one of the first players in the history of college football or the history of SEC. I forget what they said on the broadcast, to put up over 200 rushing yards and over 100 receiving yards in the same week. So, yeah, I think you have to take note of him. I don't know what kind of draft capital he's going to end up getting. I don't know how he's going to test at the combine. I haven't watched a ton of his tape yet, but I did watch that game this weekend, and I was really impressed. And so he's someone that is now firmly on my radar. I'm interested. I'm going to be studying more tape on him. And I think that come draft season, this is going to be a name that you're going to want to know and have an opinion on at the very least. And would it shock me if he kind of, I mean, we always see these guys come out of nowhere that weren't really like rostered in Devy, but their draft year, they just kind of pop off, like Tajay Spears last year, right? Or even like Roshan Johnson. He didn't pop off in college, but the pre-draft process, it was like, okay, NFL teams like this guy. And so there's always people, even though we're Devy people and we've studied these guys since they were freshmen, and you'd think we'd know every name and everybody that's worth rostering would be rostered, there's always people that fall through the cracks. And then you come to like February, March of their draft year, and they're the big buzzworthy names. And I think Cody Schrader could be one of those guys this year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you always have guys, especially in Devy depleted leagues. That's why I always laugh a little bit when people say I'm in a Devy depleted draft, because regardless of how depleted that draft is, you have guys every year that slip through the cracks. And I think Cody Schrader is one of those guys. I mean, he does it on the ground, he does it through the air. He's somebody that you need to keep your eye on for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be really, really curious when all is said and done what kind of draft capital he gets, because I mean, guys are relative unknown at this point, but for sure was impressed.
For sure. One game that was super exciting to watch, I feel like we can't go through this podcast, Cooper, without talking about, is the Lions versus the Chargers. I mean, what a shootout slugfest. Like,
That was
great,
fun.
great game for Dynasty assets that was. I mean, like, I feel like everybody that you wanted to see pop off and that you have as a Dynasty asset went off in that game.
Mm-hmm.
I know I was personally really interested in seeing, now that David Montgomery's back, what's that split? What's the workload between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery going to look like? What are your takeaways from that? How do you value the split between David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs?
Yeah, so I think the first podcast we ever did on this channel, I said to sell David Montgomery because I felt like it was only a matter of time, that Gibbs was just so much more talented than him. And it was only a matter of time before he overtook this thing. And obviously, like, it took an injury for Gibbs to really break out. But we said a couple weeks ago on the show, after Gibbs was having his big breakout, we said, well, when David Montgomery comes back, is it going to go right back to Gibbs as the backup? And we all kind of agreed, like, no, that genie's out of the bottle now. Like, Gibbs has shown too much to just relegate him back to a bench role. And so sure enough, I was really encouraged as somebody who has a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs shares, that even with Montgomery back, he was really involved this week. He had 2 touchdowns. He was getting red zone looks, red zone carries. It was just a really encouraging thing to see for Jahmyr Gibbs. And at the same time, interesting to see that they can kind of coexist, even with Jahmyr Gibbs taking on a bigger role. David Montgomery still had a really good week. But I will say a lot of David Montgomery's production came on one 75-yard touchdown run, which props to him. I didn't know he had 75-yard touchdown run in his bag of tricks. Like, I did not think he had that in his game.
You didn't have that on your bingo card this week?
So props, David Montgomery, respect for that. But also, like, I'm pretty sure he stepped out of bounds. I was a little bit surprised they didn't overturn that on the review. But yeah, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is certainly the guy that you want moving forward, both for redraft and for Dynasty. If they're getting an even workload, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to do more with his touches. And I really think at this point, Gibbs is the 1A, Montgomery's the 1B. And I think while Montgomery did put up a big week this week, I don't think we can expect that every week moving forward. And so I would be interested to see what you could get for David Montgomery. So I'll double down. I said on our first show he was a sell. I'll double down and say, again, especially he is an RB1 in Dynasty, or not in Dynasty, an RB1 in redraft leagues right now. He's a top 12 running back. And so I feel like you've got there's got to be at least some trade value there, right?
Yeah.
Like, can I get a second round pick for David Montgomery? I think I would take that, especially in a class that's going to be loaded and there's going to be a lot of good players available in the second round. So
I've said it all season. I think David Montgomery is super touchdown dependent. I mean, he popped off that big run this week, but I think if he's not getting those touchdowns, he's not putting up the RB1 numbers that you want him to. And he's getting touchdown looks because he's getting the red zone looks just about every week. So I think super touchdown dependent, a guy that, yeah, I agree with you. I'd double down and probably see if I can get a second round pick for him. If I can get an older player, or not an older player, a younger player that's gonna transition well at the next level. He's somebody that I'm super interested in probably selling. And like you said, Jahmyr Gibbs is the guy to own. his workload has only increased the last few weeks, and I think he's going to – the sky's the limit for Jahmyr Gibbs. So we talked a little while ago about Jonathan Brooks. I know we've talked about him on this podcast before, so I don't want to beat a dead horse, but all he's done since we've talked about him is continue to produce. Now he's gone out for the season with an ACL injury. He's officially done for the season. There's a potential that he doesn't go out for the NFL draft, but he comes back to college this next year. But let's just play a game and pretend that he goes out for the NFL draft this year. How high do you have him on your draft board?
Not very. If he came out this year, I think that's a mistake because you're not going to see him on the football field again. I don't think he's going to be healthy enough for the combine. I mean, we saw what happened even with a guy like Jameson Williams, who still ended up being a first-round pick, but he had to miss most of his rookie year after getting a torn ACL late in his college career. And yeah, I don't know. Knee injuries for running backs, sometimes they never look right after that. Sometimes it takes 2 years for them to look right. And so I don't know the specifics. Like, was it multiple ligaments? Yeah. How severe? Like, I haven't really dug into the severity of this injury. But for me, like, for a guy, if he was coming into the league already with a torn ACL and you don't know when he's ever even going to get on the field, he's basically off my board in rookie drafts. I don't think I would have very much interest in him at all. What do you think? Do you view it differently?
No, I'm right there with you. I just hate it, right? Because pre-injury, I think I had him
in my top. Great.
He was easily my top 5 running backs, and he was closer to probably around the 3 range than he was the 5 range. I loved Jonathan Brooks. I mean, he was a guy that I remember getting you to watch. I tried to sell you on him a couple weeks ago, and
you did.
You kind of came around to him there at the end. So I hate it for him.
I do too.
But I'm right there. I'm right there with you. Like,
he's got to come back, right? I mean, he's going to come back.
I don't see any way he goes out for the draft this year.
I don't think
what that does do is have
long enough. Like, he doesn't have a long enough track record.
Yeah,
for a team like teams are going to take him off the board if he's coming in with an ACL injury. I just don't think he's done enough.
He hasn't done enough for a team to take a chance on him yet.
Yeah, so I think he comes back, which makes it really interesting. So CJ Baxter,
that's exactly where I was getting. Yeah,
in the short term, this is going to be awesome for him because he's going to be the guy for the rest of the season, and you're probably going to see him put up some big numbers, and you're going to see him rise in a lot of people's ranks. But in the long term, like, does Jonathan Brooks come back next year where we thought next year it's going to be Baxter's job? Now Baxter's sharing with Brooks again next year, or does one of them transfer? So that's going to be really interesting to me to see how all of that plays out. But I do think for the rest of this season, with Baxter being in kind of a de facto bell cow role, and we might see a little bit more Jaden Blue now with this injury, but I think Baxter is going to be the primary ball carrier. He's going to be involved in the passing game, and he's a really good player. I think he's going to show us a lot. He's running behind a good offensive line. Yep. And so Baxter, if you have him in a Devy league, his value is about to skyrocket, I think.
And I would say it's about to skyrocket for the short term. I wonder if next season, if Jonathan Brooks comes back and he's relegated back to, supplemental roles again, do you maybe get some frustrated CJ Baxter owners where you could buy him for a decent price? I'm not sure that you can, but
maybe. I mean, we kind of saw that. We're seeing that right now with Donovan Edwards, right?
Yeah.
Last year, Blake Corum's hurt at the end of the year. Donovan Edwards pops off 4 or 5 games in a row. Everybody's excited about Donovan Edwards. He was very expensive this offseason. Corum comes back. Donovan Edwards relegated back to a bench role. Everybody's frustrated. I mean, you could get Donovan Edwards for like dirt cheap right now.
You could get him as a throw-in right now if you wanted to.
And that's something that you might want to think about doing, by the way, because I think he's going to stay for 2025. 2025. He's going to stay for next year. He's going to be in the 2025 draft class. He's going to have his shot to be the guy with Corum gone. And I do think he's still a very talented football player. So I would strongly consider buying the dip on Donovan Edwards. And for CJ Baxter, I I have no idea how all this is going to play out, but he's a talented guy. He's someone that I'm interested in having.
It's gonna be fun to watch for the rest of the season for sure. I mean, he's gonna explode. So I'm looking forward to watching it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that about does us for our time tonight, Cooper. Man, it was a blast getting on and talking football with you. Again, we're wishing Rupert to get well soon so he can be back with us again soon. But why don't you tell the people where they can find you on Twitter? Tell them if they're not watching on the YouTube channel, if they're listening to Apple Podcasts, tell them where they can find the YouTube channel and all of that.
Yeah, so this YouTube channel, if you're listening on Apple, it's youtube.com/@Devy2DynastyFR. That's the number 2, not TO. And on our channel, like, you can find all the podcasts if you like to watch video instead of listen to audio. And we've got a bunch of film breakdowns. So especially as we get into rookie season here with this 2024 class, we're going to be doing a bunch of all 22 film breakdowns, looking at strengths and weaknesses, where we draft them, how we see them translating to your dynasty roster. So you can find all that on the YouTube channel. And my Twitter is the same handle. So it's twitter.com/@Devy2DynastyFR. What about you, Matt? Where can they find you on Twitter?
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter at DevyMatt. Always want to interact with you guys on Twitter, answer any questions you have. If you guys have, I will throw this out there. If you guys have any trades that you would like us to review in the coming weeks, send those in. We'd love to hear.
For sure.
We'd love to hear from you guys and review your trades live for you guys. So if you have any of those, make sure you send them in to either one of our Twitter pages. We'll make sure to get those into the show.
Yeah, or leave them in the comments on the YouTube. We'll see those as well. So appreciate you guys tuning in. You can leave a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple. If you're on YouTube, drop us a like, drop us a comment, leave us a sub. But we really appreciate it. We'll see you guys next week.
See you guys next week.